with that, we will get into the topic of the day for today, which is all about how AI is redefining account data and planning for revenue operations teams. I am your co-host for the day, Matthew Volm, CEO and founder of RevOps Co-op, a global community of 18,000 plus revenue operators from all over the world. We have a lot of different programs that we run for our members. I'll drop a couple of links to a few of them as we go throughout the conversation. Today, we have digital events like this. We have a newsletter, a Slack group, peer-to-peer matching. We have courses and education. We also have a conference that we run annually. And actually, we just announced locations for that. So next year, we're going to be doing our US event in San Francisco the first week of May. And we are going to do our Europe event again next year, which will be in June in London. We do have US tickets on sale right now, revopsaf.com. There are 150 tickets available. Last year we sold 300, so things are limited. So if anyone out there is interested, I would encourage you to snag your tickets early. The London tickets are not available yet, but they will be over the next couple of weeks. So with that, I'm going to do quick introductions of our panelists and then hand it over to Anders. So with us, we have Ramy, who is a senior revenue operations manager over at Pigment, and we have Anders, who is the founder and CEO over at Kernel. So Anders, why don't you get us into some of the content and topic for the day, and also tell us a little bit more about yourself, and then Ramy, we can have you do a kind of a quick intro as well.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Matt. Really looking forward to the conversation. Great to see you again, Ramy. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Anders. I'm the founder and CEO at Kernel. Really, the purpose of the conversation today is to sort of combine two of my favorite topics. One of them is around account data. One of them is around planning. I know probably a lot of people on this call right now are in the middle of planning season, so it sort of felt like the perfect coincidence to sort of have myself and Ramy have a conversation about this. The way we were thinking to have the conversation today is that I'll give a high-level overview of like some of the things we're seeing, how we think about the market in general, and then we'll let Ramy introduce himself and Pigment as well, and then we'll basically dive through like a few different topics, some of which will go into quite a lot of details, including like how we use Kernel at Kernel, how they use Pigment at Pigment. And really the intention here is to not just focus at the high level, but get tactical enough that hopefully we can get to the point where people can leave with really actionable takeaways. And so if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask them in the chat. So before we let Ramy introduce himself, maybe just to give a sort of high level overview for those of you who don't know Kernel. At Kernel, we have the privilege to work with RevOps teams at many of the fastest growing technology companies in the world, including Pigment, but also many others like Remote, Navan, SIP, Gong, and so on. And really across all of our customers, our singular focus is how do we build confidence in the CRM by improving the quality of the account data, which in many cases obviously sits deeply embedded within the planning process. Usually when we have conversations with RevOps teams, whether it's as part of planning processes or otherwise, there are really four key areas of account data issues that impact the planning process. So those are the ones you'll see out here. I'm sure many of you are intimately familiar with these: firmographic errors, whether that's revenue, headcount, industry classifications, and so on. Many of those who are planning for international expansion will often suffer from missing accounts you wish should be in the CRM but are not, duplicates, and then the sort of the hardest of all of them, inaccurate hierarchies, specifically for companies that sell to large strategic accounts. And what we see is that it has a huge downstream impact. Reps target the wrong account. Planning happens based on guesswork. It's hard to do any form of reliable deployments of AI. And probably most important of all of these downstream impacts, RevOps people feel that they lose credibility. Reps spot the sort of quote unquote obvious mistakes, and then RevOps takes the blame. So without getting into too much detail on Kernel, I think the important context to have for this call is that the way that this has historically worked when RevOps teams have tried to solve these problems is most companies will have some form of master entity database, whether that's a Dun & Bradstreet or ZoomInfo. They have the advantage, they have the entities, the disadvantage that they don't necessarily reflect how you sell, which can get very complicated as part of a planning process. And so recently, what has happened is people try and plug these gaps with AI tools, whether that's Clay or the LLM providers themselves, but these tools have no notion of entities, which makes this bridge very hard. And then finally, like, to actually make this work, you need some kind of mass action capabilities, but that relies entirely on accuracy of the data itself. And so what we often find is that RevOps teams end up spending an absolutely extraordinary amount of time doing manual data corrections or reps trying to solve these problems themselves. And so really what we do at Kernel is we bring all these capabilities into one platform to allow RevOps teams to have full confidence in the data in their CRM. And maybe on that note, before we let Ramy do a quick deeper introduction to Pigment, would be curious just to understand a bit more specifically as it relates to AI. I know, Matt, you've kicked off your poll just to get a feel from the audience where you use AI today in your stack.
Yeah, Anders, what do you think? What do you think maybe the top two or three are going to be? Or maybe
I
the
think
top one. I don't know how broad you want to go.
I think that's probably my best guess is there's a difference between the intention of where to use AI and where people actually use the
Yeah.
most AI. My best guess is that most companies will have done some form of AI as it relates to data enrichment and account research, but wish that they could have that more deeply embedded in workflows such as forecasting and planning, which is why we're having this conversation today.
Yeah.
Curious about
Ramy,
the
what would be your answer? Because I don't think panelists have the option to select answers
Yeah.
here, but what would be yours?
My bet would be on account research, and secondly, I would say lead scoring in terms of how it relates to your current opportunities and activity. But account
Yeah.
research far as a top one, at least from what I'm seeing around me.
All right. Well, let's see. I'm going to end that in drum roll, please. We have account research at the top of the list, followed by CRM hygiene, data enrichment, lead scoring, and sales forecasting. And I know we're going to talk a little bit about territories. No one answered territory planning, which I don't know if anyone's surprised by that or not, but yeah, these are the results. Looks like account research, clear winner.
Yes, I think that maps very much onto what we're seeing out there. So maybe on that note, Ramy, if you want to maybe give us a bit more of an introduction to yourself, your role at Pigment, and what you do at Pigment.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Anders, for the introduction, and thanks, Matt, for putting this event together. Super happy to join and to chime in on this topic. So just in a nutshell, Pigment is a B2B SaaS on connected planning. So the objective is to really allow teams to make decisions and to connect and interact on those decisions when they build the budget and how they can forecast and make scenarios on their data. So I'm almost 3 years now into Pigments. I'm covering the EMEA sales motion from pipeline to forecast, and we are, of course, heavily using Pigment internally for everything planning. And we're going to give you a sneak peek on what we do. Hopefully, it will allow you to get easy, actionable items to work on your for your own company. And we're currently also implementing Kernel because it went all the more important how strong our data should be in order to do a correct planning, and how like mistakes into accounts, the different data behind the accounts, how big the mistakes it can bring if we are not being able to at scale manage those mistakes and correct them as we go.
Right.
So yeah, we're moving from really using like specific databases to have a kind of a more AI combined approach with kernel to maximize this efficiency on the data. So yeah, looking forward to give you in the following slides a bit of an overview of how we're using Pigment internally based on the data provided and being cleaned with the help of kernel.
And maybe if we start at that level, Ramy, obviously the title of the event very much is focused on like the intersection between data planning and AI. Like when you think about some of the work that you're doing with us and with your own platform, from your perspective, like what are some of the key things you're seeing in terms of like how that market is shifting, both in terms of how you use and think about account data, but also in terms of how RevOps teams think about the planning process?
Yeah, as it relates to account data, I think we are shifting from a very static approach where we tend to revamp. We are used to revamp our account data every year or so. At Max, being using most of the time stale data because we don't take into account all the events like merger and acquisitions, change of positioning, company growth, of course, also contacts attached to accounts, maybe. So all this kind of stuff, we are more and more now able to have a dynamic view on all of this. And also, we are, I think, moving from a kind of rigid segmentation where we have a really fixed and rigid rules on how to assign the different accounts into a more kind of dynamic approach where we have a model to just make sure we have the coverage based on the ICP of the company and the ICP of the prospect we'd like to sell to. So it's really, I think it goes hand in hand with like a need more and more to have a planning tool alongside your CRM, which of course should keep a kind of structure and should be like something that stays across the different quarters and semesters to provide reliable data on the historical views. However, we do need now more and more to be agile, to plan ahead of time, and to be able to build, I think, scenarios with a much more dynamic data sets and much more enriched data sources.
And it feels like the key word there is dynamics. Obviously, Pigment sits on this intersection between like data and planning. If we had to like unpack dynamic a bit, like from a planning perspective, what exactly does it mean to have a more dynamic approach to this?
So for example, I think we are constantly adding on our side additional data points, first of all. So to what as we tend to refine what our ICP is. Example, we tend to see a correlation, for example, in a job post, for example, linked to accounts with the propensity or the chance that we have to open and up with them. Or for example, the kind of metric that become critical, let's say the revenue metric for some specific industry, finance, let's say, becoming more and more important than the simple segmentation, classical one on employee range. So I'd say this is two examples that really that we worked on recently,
Right.
and and also giving the flexible, having a clean structure, but flexible enough to give managers in their local territories the ability to really choose. And I think this is where really a fine boundary between having a consistent process, but also agile enough to be able to allocate the best accounts as they see fit and give them with the. I'm gonna give you a kind of example of how we try to do this at Pigments. I'll be able to adapt locally for the needs of each of the businesses, and I think that's basic. It's one of the biggest struggle I think of RevOps is how to maintain a consistent approach and a reliable approach, but also be able to adjust and be agile for more mature markets versus new ones, and be able to be relevant for all of those different motions.
And when you think about the role of account data in that more dynamic planning cycle, can you explain a bit more about like how do you think about the role of account data, and also two, like how do you see that changing as part of enabling this world where you can plan more dynamically?
I think we are trying more and more to be like make scenarios, I think, and try to have the CRM live on one side, but on the other side have different layers, a lot of scenarios. And in our case, we're using Pigment on this purpose. So
Right.
be able to have to compare different scenarios and see what would the different segmentation, for example, look like, and
Mhm.
be able to take decisions based. That I think the most critical aspect of it is to not be a bottleneck and be able to not constantly be forced to review our CRM structure to adapt to a new reality, but to be able to constantly on top of the historical data, make scenarios, build new plans, adjust the quotas, adjust the territories, and make sure we give answers to the top management, but also frontline leaders that are really faced with different realities.
And so that comes from having basically the account data in your CRM and then like a view of like how the business operates and then the ability to pivot around that throughout the year. When you historically, the way that a lot of, RevOps people have seen, data hygiene and account data has very much been like a sort of Salesforce Salesforce problem. But in this world where you want to use a tool like Pigment to allow yourself to like plan and iterate dynamically throughout the year, like from your point of view and from Pigment's point of view, like how does account data issues cascade into the planning process, whether it's like firmographics, duplicates, or hierarchies and so on?
Yeah, it does cascade into many actually processes and do translate into like the into many in like in the day-to-day life of many teams. First of all, finance, as they it does impact the top-down like forecast or like a budget that they're top-down, yeah, like targets that they're assigned to each of the big regions, and within those regions, the different countries. If we have a wrong term, or if we're missing subsidiaries, for example, in a given area, we might underestimate or overestimate the number of accounts. Um, that's first. I think that's first thing that comes to mind. Also, we do have issues, of course, with everything linked to HR, the capacity, how the recruitment will be impacted between the different regions. So quota setting, capacity, that's the first, I think, the first two impact and the first two teams with whom we interact on a daily basis as RevOps. Of
Right.
course, sales managers being the ones on dealing with the day-to-day issues that they have between the reps. And of course, we with bad data or stale data, you only can maximize the amount of conflicts between teams. EMEA teams and AMER teams, for example, we've seen now that we started to clean with kernel approach our hierarchies. We do see like a decrease of the kind of late split that we have to do when we have a wrong database, and that we and when we miss, for example, some subsidiaries or some links between accounts
Right.
across both sides of the ocean, for example.
And let's maybe dive into that in a bit more detail. And I can share my screen in a second. I want you to show Pigment as well. We can dive into Salesforce. I think I want to make sure that for everyone who's watching, we get into the details of like what do we actually mean when we say dynamic data? What do we mean when we say this like world where hierarchies are accurate inside of the CRM? And so what I've done is I'll just quickly open Salesforce here. Matt, you tell me if you cannot see my screen. I assume you can. So this is our CRM instance. I wanted just to give a few examples of like what do we mean when we say dynamic account data. So we've taken the account IBM in this particular case. Historically, the way we see RevOps team use account data is like obviously we'll get account data from an account data provider. Those providers sell the same data to everyone, which means that it doesn't necessarily always reflect how you sell. And then that has an impact both on the core firmographics, so like headcount, HQ location, revenue estimation, and so on. And so the way that we approach it is for every account that's within a CRM, we have an entity database. Then we have all the context about those entities. That would be like the website, the Wikipedia, job descriptions, LinkedIn profiles, and so on, which allows us ahead of the planning cycle of our customers to crawl the web on their behalf to make sure that the data is accurate. So here would be an example with IBM, where we take the LinkedIn headcount, which many reps will still go and check, and then we provide the kernel headcount, which comes from reasoning across the context about IBM, and we'll provide the reasoning explainer for headcount. The same holds true for HQ location and the other core firmographics. But I think what's interesting in what you mentioned, Ramy, is that where this gets really exciting is when you can start to think about like what are the attributes on the account that allows you to segment your market and estimate your TAM in a way that reflects what you're trying to sell. And so we have, for example, in our case, custom subvertical classifications across all accounts in our market. And the way we think about, for example, whether something should be classified as AI or not, like might be different from the way that another business thinks about it. But the key thing is we wanted to reflect what matters to you, and then again provide reasoning so that reps can understand why this matters. The same goes for like understanding what's the primary sales motion. In our case, we care a lot about the composition of the revenue organization, like how many SDRs are there? Do they have strategic account executives who sell into enterprises? What's the size of the RevOps function? Are they likely to have data issues in EMEA? and so on. So this is our CRM, but obviously the Pigment CRM would be different. And I think for a lot of companies, including Pigment, who sell into enterprises where this gets really hard, is like hierarchies, they ruin it for everyone. And so what we do is we basically allow our customers to use Kernel to build out the hierarchies natively inside of Salesforce. We will tell them what to do with the account. In this case, there's no action. This is just the parent account of IBM. But if we dive into the native family tree inside of Salesforce here, what we will have done is we'll have built the family tree and we'll think about, okay, how should we think about the subsidiaries of IBM? Historically, obviously, this has been very based on legal entities. But what's unique about using AI for this is that we can start to think about whether something is a buying center or not, which in our case requires the presence of a sales organization or a RevOps organization. But for some of our customers, might be other things. And I think this to me is where planning and account data intersects quite nicely, and where I think the work that we're doing together is really exciting, because Pigment offers the ability for RevOps teams to like iterate throughout the year on planning purpose. Some of our other customers use Pigment as well, and Kernel allows those RevOps teams to make sure that the account data that feeds into planning is customized to how they go to market.
And the thing I like about what you just mentioned, Anders, is that again, I think we've been all us operators have all this baggage of what we've been limited to when it comes to account data over the past how many years. And you hit on it of, the traditional sort of data providers have the same sort of data points that are ultimately available and sold to everyone. And so that's been our starting point. We just take for granted that like that's just the way it is. And then we've tried to essentially build our unique sort of business requirements around the data that we have access to. And what you're describing and the ability that AI gives all of us is to actually move that in the other direction, which is these are our business requirements. This is what we care about. This is who we sell to. This is how we view, parent accounts, children. It's going to be different for you. It's going to be different for Ramy. It's going to be different for everybody here on the team. And then we move on to how AI can deliver that through account data that's actually important, relevant, valuable for me. So it's a total flip, and it kind of messes with your mind a little bit to even think that something like that is possible or doable, but it's huge.
Yes, yeah, I think it does. The way I try and explain it to RevOps people who are like new to this shift is that the world you should imagine that you're in is a world in which where if you can do it in your CRM or on the internet, then it can now be done at scale, right? That's really the key shift here. And therefore you should not depend on how other people see the market. You should take the way you see the market and bring it into your CRM and then into your planning process. I'm curious, Ramy, from your perspective, like for strategic accounts specifically, I know Pigment is very successful in the enterprise. Like, how do you think about those large strategic accounts as part of your planning process?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think what we tend to do today, we don't go at length by creating, as you just showed for IBM, the whole list of the subsidiaries. Usually we start with like an account similar to IBM, 10-ish subsidiaries where we had already first contacts. And as we go today, we have like a kind of a process like a ChatGPT request to really be able to build as the sales progress to those entities, build like and add those entities. And parallel to this, we are doing this kind of following the cleaning actions, as you said, by using Kernel, but also specifying in Kernel our business requirements. So that we sell to those kind of companies. We like those kind of decision-making titles. And based on those kind of items, we tend to have a specific creation of business units or geo entities that, of course, might very well be different from one company to another. And based on the logic, like we tend to, so in a nutshell, tend to not get lost into the reality of an account as per the number of legal entities, and try to be really like specific on our priorities and be super focused on this and make sure we we understand what we create, and each account, each entity has a role in the overall work of a rep.
Yes, I definitely agree with that. I think most RevOps people have tried at some point in their life to do the big account, the import, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's definitely our recommendation in general that things should exist in the CRM for a reason. And also when you think about things like hierarchies, it's not just a question of like importing all the legal entities. It should reflect how you actually want to prospect into these accounts. And so if you compare the like, I know we've recently started working together, like you used to do some of these things with ChatGPT, like how is using a tool like Kernel different to that?
It allows us to do it, as you said, at scale on like categorizing all the kind of actions throughout our different territories. So, for an example, what we really did recently, as we are really in the phase of implementation of the tool. So we flagged first of all the kind of low risk based on our requirements actions that we can do in bulk. Let's say flag duplicates, entities that no longer make sense for us, stale like acquired companies, no, like with low activity or not owned recently by a rep. That's really the low risk side of things. And then we split between the managers the kind of high risk accounts that might change of ownership, change of critical data like location, employee range, revenue, etc. And we have them really review them by top priority. So
Right.
that's a kind of I think the word here is that do it at scale and make sure we have a consistent approach and we see data through the lens of our business priorities and not using data just from a database which is generic, which is not like made for a specific business. So we add this kind of intelligent layer on top that help us really at scale focus on the important things per geography per manager.
That's very clear, and I think definitely aligns with like how we would think of like best practices. And I think for a lot of RevOps people, the anxiety of doing some of these exercises come from the fact that when you have a large sales organization,
Yeah.
you want to fix your CRM without breaking your your CRM, right? And like so risk management and change management is a very important part of these exercises. And maybe like to change gears a bit, I want to dive into territory planning at Pigment in more detail. And maybe I'll just hand the microphone to you, Ramy, for a bit. Like, can you just talk us through like, what's the architecture within Pigment that supports the territory and quota planning process?
Yeah, sure thing. Yeah, I'm gonna walk you through like in the next few slides on really the approach that we have, which is a yearly approach. We have a yearly carve out, what we call it territory planning, also a book of business carve out. So it's assigning a set of accounts to our reps being in seats or to be hired in order to have the correct coverage on our ICP and in order to make sure we fit two objectives. First of all, have all accounts covered, all interesting accounts covered by a rep, and have also equal territories between the reps in order to give them as much as possible the same chance to reach their quota. So here it's roughly a months-long process from start to go live. And it's a good example of the kind of connected planning that Pigment allows to do. Same can go, for example, on the compensation structure or the building of the HR budgets. And but here I think it's a super precise topic for RevOps that we can deep dive into some of the details in the next slides if
Yeah, I'll click.
yeah.
Yeah.
So really, it's Pigment works as gives you access to different apps. An app cover in most cases, a given process. So here we have an app dedicated to territories and book of business. And so as we are defining it, as we use it today, it goes in this specific step. So first of all, we define a scoring based on as many data points as possible, refreshed as frequently as possible with a set of scoring. And I think I've just seen a question in the chat of how to assess the potential of accounts. I think it starts for us with a scoring. So we see what kind of accounts we closed in the recent period, how it differentiates between territories and sizes, and we get the first sense of generic parameters that will assess if an account is good or no. And then in a second layer, managers adjust these rules based on what they see locally. We have within this process of at regular time data reviews. And then we give a sense of a global scoring that will feed into all our account dimension brought from the CRM to Pigment, but with this intelligence layer on top. Once scoring is done, we switch gear and we go to the really seats and territories part of the process. So we make sure to have actually all territories covered by at least a rep. So this is how we segment our our TAM basically. And based on the different rules, then per seniority of the rep, depending on the enterprise rep that we have at Pigment, so on bigger accounts and more mid-market or corporate, each of them have different kind of a different number of accounts that they cover. An enterprise rep will have less account because more work is needed to cover an IBM, let's say, than the a much smaller startup or tech company. And based on the rules, we have the managers first have a first set, a first check, and first assignation, and then we share it with reps in order to close the loop and have a view also dynamically on the different accounts asked by potentially people outside of their given territory because of personal relationship or because of historical data.
Right.
That's also the power, I think, of having multiple scenarios and more kind of a business logic on top of our CRM data. And it's yeah, the end-to-end process managing Pigment make it super convenient to manage from end-to-end this process and make sure before we go back to the CRM, because that's at the end we will need to have these accounts activated in the CRM. We have a complete checks, complete like audit, and we all those teams interact and do and like interact and communicate around this planning.
And how one thing I was curious about, Ramy, is that so it sounds like it's quite an iterative process in terms of like making sure that you get feedback from the
Yeah.
field, ensuring that everything is with the right person. Once territories are assigned, like how does it work, like post go live in terms of like allowing for reallocation throughout the year? Like how do you handle changes to account data and so on? Because it feels like one of the things that you do very well at Pigment is like adapt adapt to the market, which I think for a lot of RevOps people is very hard to do with the current state of data and the current state of their planning tools.
Yeah, I think it's a very good question. I think this is the tricky part. We do have a process to update a book of business within a given year, dedicated process to submit a request in order, of course, to avoid conflict between people. And this is where also like the best your data is at start, the less you will have to face those conflict or those last minute changes.
Right.
But it does happen, and we're switching more and more to a kind of I would not say a round the clock like a review of our territories and book of business, but on a much more frequent way. And that's also, I think, the power of a planning tool is that you can live adjust the planning. You timestamp the different period of time where you made the biggest changes, but you do see like the evolution, as you said, of an account being reviewed because of or being simply accounts simply disappearing or growing in size from one year to another, or of course, sometime one quarter to another. I think as we're seeing this with AI native company, it goes super fast. So
Right.
it requires the team to be really adjust the bandwidth and to cover the accounts. So I
Right.
think this kind of setup on a yearly exercise is moving more and more towards a kind of an ongoing monitoring of how we are covering our TAM, and with the help of a tool like Kernel on one side and the flexibility and scenarios on Pigment on the other, I think we make the best to react and anticipate the changes and anticipate the capacity that we need to have.
Yeah, I would say definitely one thing that we see is that like the to enable that kind of process, which I think for a lot of RevOps people is like, that's the dream state you want to get to. The more accurate the data is that like go live of this allocation, the lower the probability is of like disputes and other things when you have to reshuffle or have more like dynamic books throughout the year.
Exactly. Yeah.
Maybe
So
like
yeah.
Go ahead. I don't know if you want to dive into the scoring in more detail, Ramy, or if you feel like that was covered before. I know Matt has another poll for us coming up in one of the next slides.
I think we're all good on this. Indeed, it's more like in the details of the process, but it's yeah, the main idea was shared already. Yeah.
I'll let you do your thing, Matt, with the, there you go.
Yeah. All right. So I know we've talked a bunch about planning and want to know if you use AI without oversight. Or I guess let's just say, do you use AI in your planning process? Often, sometimes, never. So, Ramy, you would say often, right? I assume.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah. Where do you think the rest of the universe is though?
I'd say more on the never, which I think is still okay for most of the companies. Yeah,
Yeah.
they never between never and sometimes more weights on the never though. Yeah.
Yeah. What's your how would you define often? Because again, I'm just assuming, right, that since we're here and you're on this panel and you're at a place like Pigment that you're going to say often. But yeah, what do you think, like, where would you draw that line between often and sometimes?
I would maybe say on the in the if we use AI in the not weekly or bi-weekly like rhythm of business, usual rhythm of business, like with whether it be forecast call or pipeline calls, if we tend to revert to some kind of a AI capacity to really check our data and ask question, I would say we would it would be more yeah, the answer would be more often. So really entrenched in the habits of the teams to constantly leverage the data and use AI in this planning exercise.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, it looks like, I mean, at least when I ended it, sometimes and never were tied. So it looks like folks are definitely in the sometimes or never camp, and then we have one unicorn out there who's in the often bucket along with you, Ramy.
Maybe, did you have another point there, Matt? Otherwise,
No, no, all you, Anders.
I guess one thing I was curious about in relation to some of the things we discussed before. I mean, as you think about like different segments as part of this planning process, like a lot of companies distinguish between like enterprise, strategic, mid-market, and so on. Like how do you think about both the like how the data might influence it, but also how the planning process should be different across those segments?
I think yeah, at least yeah, sharing what we see at Pigment, it's different worlds. Let's say in a nutshell, enterprise is much more into what you just described, Anders, for IBM, on into like understanding the architecture of a company, the different entities, who's deciding for what. Is it an independent or a standalone subsidiary? Sorry, independent or really just a child company not deciding on its own. So it's much more firmo, I would say firmo focus, and how the structure evolves through time. So scanning through a 10K would be super paramount to really understand those accounts. On the other side, mid-market for us, corporate, where it starts at 5K employees and below at Pigment globally for most geographies. It's much more a world of insights, so more adding constantly what we just talked about in the beginning of our session, adding like new data points, a job post, a kind of team size, for example, most like a growth of the employee headcount, those kind of insights that we try to really correlate with our success in terms of opening ops and closing those ops are much more paramount and important for those smaller accounts
Right.
because
And
we
do
know
you,
we will not be able to tackle all of them. We're focusing really on the strong insights and try to detect the new ones that
right.
will.
And so for the mid-market accounts, will you feed data into your scoring model and then recalibrate throughout the year? Is that how you think about it, or like how?
Yeah, on a regular basis, we want to verify that indeed a high score is correlated to a high percentage of ops open and matured ops and close, etc. Like all the good leading metrics.
Right.
And so we try to adjust this model on a regular basis. And we, on the contrary, on the let's say the more enterprise side of things, I think it's more how we can leverage also our partners, the general ecosystem, like the connection that we have to in order to put on top priority some accounts versus others. But in any case, we know those accounts should be
Right.
worked round the clock. And it's just a matter of how you prioritize an industry vertical versus another based on the logos that you have, for example, and the kind of references that you have that are super critical to close those big logos.
Right. And I think that distinction is a healthy one in the sense that like for the big ones, you sort of like you can win. The question is like how you get in. And then for some of the smaller one, it's more a question of like how do you make sure that you have the attributes that allows you to create some kind of like segmentation or prioritization based on sort of propensity to buy. When you think about the larger accounts that you're saying like being worked around the clock, like what are in terms of like buying centers, hierarchies and stuff like this, like rules of engagement, like how do you think about structuring that at Pigment? Is it one rep who goes after the full family tree, or how do you think about it?
Yeah, in most cases, we those accounts enter what we call our global account policy. So we
Right,
have indeed one rep in like the headquarter country owning the accounts globally. However,
right,
we do have all the subsidiaries, like standalone ones, being assigned to the local reps. And we put in place split policies early on, and I think it's something I do encourage really the RevOps folks working on a really enterprise motion to put in place because it avoids later like late stage conflict, let's say, and avoid everyone to be aligned from the onset and to be able to give like its maximum and work the accounts really at depth without
right,
fearing of any ownership issues and down the line discussion on the compensation. So it's shared ownership and split compensation and shared also resources between the marketing and partner teams within
right.
the different geographies.
Makes sense. And I think the often, when I speak with RevOps teams who run organizations that sell into enterprise or strategic accounts, there's like such a huge overlap between like data strategy and governance around like compensation rules and rules of engagement and so on. And I think the reality is if you want to win in the enterprise, you have to nail it. Like it's just like, to truly win at that scale, making sure that reps know how to navigate these large organizations is absolutely paramount. And I think the thing that a lot of companies struggle with related to your point from before is that the what historically has been in Salesforce is not necessarily a reflection of how you actually see those organizations, right? And I think to your point about like making sure that the subsidiaries should exist for a reason, right? Like there are companies to whom certain subsidiaries are relevant buying centers, and then there are other companies to whom those same subsidiaries are not relevant buying centers, and it really depends and should depend on how you sell. And I think that's one of the most exciting things about like using AI for hierarchies is we can finally start, to Matt's point from before, making sure that the Salesforce or your SIM in general reflects how you think about those things, how you think about rules of engagement, how you think about compensation, so that you can work your enterprise accounts around the clock with a high level of confidence. I think, I know you have another question on this front, Matt. So maybe I'll let you run the poll.
Yeah, so the next poll question that we are asking is how has AI improved your confidence in, we'll say, your data and your planning? Just curious, like if it's helped, hindered, indifferent. I know, I guess maybe I'll voice one of the things that I think about a lot, and then Anders and Rami will be curious to hear about you. I think we all of us here use AI in some way, shape, or form to do our jobs really every single day, right? Different facets from data to planning to helping us to draft an email to asking a question we would otherwise go to Google for. But there's always like one as you start to use it for more complex things, there's always this kind of thing in the back of at least my head, which is like, well, hallucinations, is it accurate? You know, it wants to just deliver things that are going to provide you with answers, whether or not those are 100% correct, 90%, 50%, or 0%, right? We've all heard the jokes of like comparing AI to like an intern. I think the best analogy that I've heard is someone was like, no, AI is like an MBA intern, a business school intern, right? Like they're going to tell you something, they're going to sound smart and they're going to be really confident. But you may, and I can say that as a MBA myself, but like I'm a former MBA intern, but like you, right? Like they're going to sound really confident. They're probably going to sound smart, but you're not actually going to know if it's like what degree of accuracy there
Right.
is. And so I don't know if you guys feel that way, like maybe some things that you can do to, I don't know, get past that, check that, operate within those constraints. I don't know, but I'm going to end the poll now and then, yeah, curious to hear your guys' perspective.
I don't know if you want to answer now, if you want to answer the poll first, but I definitely have thoughts on that particular question, Matt. But
Yeah.
I think I can see it's a
Yeah, it
move.
looks like yes. Most people have said yes, it has, kind of improved. Yeah.
Uh, I would say to do it, there's a huge difference between the use of AI at like consumer scale and then the use of AI at like enterprise scale. Like,
Yeah.
me using ChatGPT versus me using AI to clean and enrich a CRM with 700,000 accounts, those are completely different. And the question is like once you reach scale, the size and the magnitude of the errors also increase. And so it becomes even more important to avoid the scenarios that you describe. And that's basically our entire business, right? It's like how do we build confidence in data? And it's hard, like it takes real effort to make it work at enterprise scale. To give you a sense of like some of the things that we do, like there's obviously like a wide range of like best practices you can do in terms of like how you avoid hallucinations in general. I think for RevOps use cases specifically, one of the things that's very important to us is to have good comparison data sets like evals. So what we do is we basically have a library of what you can think of as like the hardest possible cases for AI to handle. Like, some e-commerce websites will be extremely hard for like account identity resolution. Some hierarchies are extremely hard because of a high M&A activity. Some headcount numbers are extremely hard due to low LinkedIn adoption. And so what we do is we basically constantly optimize, what's the right model selection, what's the right prompts, how should we think about the sort of chain of events that happens to continue to improve accuracy against those test sets. And I would say that's the minimum you need in order to confidently be able to use AI for enrichment in an enterprise CRM. Does it make a big difference if you are like a company with, 2 reps? A bit. But if you have like 70 reps and you want to achieve what Ramy described and be able to redistribute your books during the year, have compensation tied to it and stuff like this, like it just cannot go wrong, right? And I think we
Yeah.
really have to distinguish between those two use cases. We have one person for each of the core firmographics. Like one person whose only job it is to make sure that headcount accuracy goes up. And
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Makes sense.
I think one of the other things I was curious about from Ramy and maybe also from you, Matt, is so obviously both Pigment and Kernel are very AI native companies. What are some of the other areas where you see successful use of AI and probably even more importantly, like where do you think it stops? Like what's, for example, in the planning process, where is human context relevant and needed?
Yeah, I think I agree. Based on what you said, you have to be very intentional. I think that when you're using AI, and this is where I think things get complicated. Indeed, when you have a moving context, when you
Right.
have plans really from one month to another changing, when you're not sure about the headcount for next year, that is in 2 or 3 months. So I think it had to be, yeah, it has to be really carefully, I think the carefully used and really used for very specific questions and specific answers based on your top business priority. So I
Right.
think you can easily get a full sense of being able to expand a lot on the use cases and make sure you kind of almost please everyone. But I think like if you come down, I think the critical questions I think that you can really check with the sales manager, like every go-to-market leader will be really to not miss any good account and have then a kind of a balanced situation between the reps. So those two questions, I think critical questions can be really answered with easy data points, like not like easy in the sense of you're not forced to expand really your database or expand the way the manual process that you have, but really be really intentional again and make sure you one step at a time you really improve. And as you said, you have a kind of accuracy go up on the up, and I think that's also where we you need to be patient. And I think it's if it only improves every month, every quarter, you're trending in the right direction. So it doesn't. I think it doesn't cannot be solved like overnight using AI, but it has to be. It can be 100% done at scale much more easily than before.
And
Yeah.
maybe go ahead, Matt. Sorry. No.
I was actually going to ask Ramy and Anders if you want to kind of ask your question first, you can do this too. But you're asking about like AI where it's, where you're currently leveraging it, maybe not more where you're not. And you asked about the human element. That got me thinking about AI as it relates to cold outbound. And obviously could be a very divisive topic. But Ramy, I'm curious for you. We've obviously talked a lot about data planning, territories. A lot of this stuff is important for right
Yeah.
who reps are going after, and then obviously they're going after them in a lot of different ways. So, are you guys at Pigment using AI in your outbound motion at all? If so, why and where? And if not, same question, why not?
No, we're using, I think that's a good question. I think we're using it a lot. And specifically, we have a super high performing growth team, really leveraging like kind of all the insights that we detect and all the signal we detect at the different accounts in order to trigger really our outbound motion. So first of all, we use AI to have at scale, like can manage at scale answers or first answers to the prospect that are registered to our events, are interested by Pigment, following Pigment on LinkedIn. So all this
Hmm.
kind of first approach is more and more used at scale using AI, namely NA10, HeyReach are the tool that we're using. But also it goes in really close collaboration with BDR and AE. This is where I think the magic happens. It like always super early in the process, a BDR and AE like gives an even more specific answer, a more specific reach out, and is able to complement those kind of workflows and is able to really detect early on the signals that to trigger a conversation. So we are really experimenting every day this kind of how to manage at scale the those kind of campaigns. So mostly via LinkedIn, where we were able to like to initiate a lot of interesting conversations.
Yeah, no, that's great. And Anders, we have 2 minutes left, so why don't you give us any parting
Yeah,
thoughts?
I think on that specific point, so the original history of Kernel is that our first product was an AI end-to-end AI SDR, and we basically spent 6 months crying inside of sales.
I wasn't sure how much of that you were going to share.
No,
So,
and that's really what prompted the pivot towards saying like let's solve some of the hardest data problems that are facing RevOps teams today, because I think the rule number one of like using AI in any part of your go-to-market motion is that it's very much a garbage in, garbage out situation. And so that really remains our core focus. In terms of the use of AI within kernel itself, we obviously use our own tool for making sure that reps are targeting the right accounts. A significant proportion of our pipeline that comes from outbound comes from cold calling and from LinkedIn messages, which are probably the parts of the channels where you can do some AI for drafting and stuff like this. But I definitely think we still see the benefit of a human touch, especially for larger accounts where our outbound reps
mhm.
are doing an absolutely phenomenal job in ways that would be very hard for AI to replicate, like building, personal brands on LinkedIn and stuff like this. And so I think for that part, there's, in some sense, the bar is now higher to stand out, and I think that's really important to keep in mind.
Yeah. No, that's great. Yeah, the human element, business still gets done between people, right? And the more you can do to facilitate that and make that human to human connection, the more you are going to stand out, especially with all the AI slop that is out there. So that is all we've got for y'all. We are basically at top of the hour. So Anders and Ramy, I want to thank you both very much for joining as panelists, dropping some knowledge on the group today on all things AI planning and account data. To all the attendees out there, thank you for joining as well. So with that, I'll let you all run. Have a great rest of your day, evening, wherever you're at in the world, and we'll see you all at the next one.